As the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey of the coronation ceremony, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes.
It began with a closed-door confrontation deep inside Buckingham Palace, one so explosive that even senior courtiers reportedly abandoned protocol to avoid being seen near the king's private wing. But when King Charles III emerged pale and silent, while aides quietly escorted Queen Camilla away from the residence hours later, whispers of a royal rupture could no longer be contained. Something irreversible had happened, and this time it involved the late Queen's estate itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the crisis began during what was initially described as a routine administrative review connected to the private holdings once overseen by the late Queen Elizabeth II. But insiders now whisper that the atmosphere inside the palace turned icy the moment senior legal advisors allegedly raised concerns about unauthorized discussions tied to future access and influence over royal properties. Different interpretations of that meeting describe Charles sitting in prolonged silence while palace accountants carefully reviewed confidential estate protections that had reportedly remained untouched for decades. Protections many within the monarchy viewed not as personal assets, but as sacred boundaries guarding the crown's legacy itself. What shocked courtiers most, however, was not simply the legal tension unfolding behind closed doors, but the growing belief that lines had allegedly been crossed at the exact moment Charles was already physically and emotionally vulnerable during ongoing health struggles that had weakened the inner stability of the royal household since early 2024. As the hours passed, unusual instructions reportedly spread across royal administrative offices with breathtaking speed. Palace aides were allegedly warned not to discuss movements within the king's private corridor, while senior staff members quietly canceled scheduled briefings without explanation. According to insiders familiar with the palace's rigid routines, the level of secrecy surrounding the confrontation immediately triggered alarm, because even during periods of constitutional pressure, Buckingham Palace traditionally operated with carefully controlled calm. But this felt different. Sources close to royal administrative circles claim documents connected to inheritance structures, estate oversight, and long-standing private agreements were suddenly pulled into emergency review sessions involving not only Charles' most trusted advisors, but also senior accountants responsible for safeguarding the late Queen's private arrangements. It is now whispered in the highest echelons of palace staff that concerns emerged after reports surfaced suggesting Camilla's allies had allegedly explored broader influence tied to portions of the Queen's personal legacy holdings, a possibility that reportedly stunned several members of the old guard who viewed such discussions as dangerously sensitive. Those familiar with the monarchy's deeply traditional hierarchy claim the crown has always treated royal estates differently from ordinary family inheritance, because these properties symbolize continuity, sacrifice, and institutional permanence, rather than personal reward. And once that understanding appeared threatened, panic quietly began spreading behind palace walls. What reportedly devastated Charles most was the emotional weight attached to the confrontation itself. Various interpretations of the private exchange describe the king becoming visibly shaken, as advisors outlined the potential consequences of even perceived interference involving the late Queen's protected legacy structures. Royal insiders claim Charles repeatedly attempted to calm tensions during the meeting, torn between loyalty to his wife and the crushing responsibility of protecting the institution he had waited his entire life to inherit. Yet the deeper the discussions reportedly went, the more severe the atmosphere became. Insiders whisper that at one point palace legal teams allegedly referenced warnings Queen Elizabeth herself had quietly communicated years earlier, concerning the separation between personal influence and institutional inheritance. Warnings many believed were designed specifically to prevent future conflicts inside the royal household. The emotional pressure reportedly intensified further once Princess Anne and Prince William were pulled into confidential consultations within hours of the confrontation. According to sources familiar with internal palace dynamics, Anne reacted with cold fury after learning the full scope of the dispute, while William reportedly became deeply concerned about the long-term damage such allegations could inflict upon public trust in the monarchy itself. Suddenly, what had started as a private disagreement over estate boundaries transformed into something far more dangerous: a battle over the moral authority of the crown during one of the most fragile periods of Charles's reign. And then came the leaks. Quiet at first. Barely noticeable. A whispered phrase here. A carefully worded concern there. But within royal media circles, insiders gradually began signaling that something unprecedented had erupted behind the scenes. Reports claiming that lines were crossed concerning inheritance boundaries tied to the crown started spreading among journalists, royal commentators, and former staff members with connections to palace networks. The timing only intensified public fascination, because for weeks observers had already noticed subtle shifts inside the royal household, canceled appearances, unusually distant body language during engagements, and growing whispers that powerful figures within the monarchy were no longer aligned behind closed doors. Different interpretations of recent palace movements now appear far more significant in hindsight, especially as speculation grows that senior royals had already been quietly preparing for a confrontation that many feared could eventually become unavoidable. Some insiders even claim the dispute exposed a deeper divide between those who view the monarchy as a sacred institution rooted in duty and those allegedly accused of treating influence around the crown as something that could be expanded through personal proximity and emotional leverage. But the deeper truth wasn't just about money or property. It was about a sacred royal boundary that, according to insiders, Queen Elizabeth II spent decades protecting from exactly this kind of conflict. For decades, the late Queen Elizabeth II reportedly treated certain royal holdings not as personal luxuries, but as untouchable pieces of national legacy. And according to whispered accounts now spreading through palace corridors, one particular estate became the center of a devastating behind-the-scenes power struggle that Charles never expected would involve his own wife. What made the situation so explosive, insiders claim, was the belief that these estates were never meant to function like ordinary family inheritance passed between relatives behind closed doors. Within the monarchy, places like Balmoral Castle and Sandringham House reportedly carried something far heavier than financial value. They represented continuity, permanence, the sacred geography of the crown itself. For generations, royal advisors allegedly viewed these estates as emotional anchors, holding together the identity of the monarchy during wars, scandals, abdications, and family betrayals. That is why the growing whispers surrounding Camilla's alleged interest in long-term influence connected to portions of the Queen's protected holdings triggered such deep alarm within palace circles. To outsiders, it may have sounded like a private family disagreement. But inside Buckingham Palace, insiders claim the matter was treated as something far more dangerous. A possible challenge to the invisible boundaries Queen Elizabeth had spent decades carefully reinforcing. Reports suggest the late Queen became increasingly protective of royal inheritance structures during the final years of her reign, particularly as tensions inside the House of Windsor intensified following public scandals, media wars, and growing divisions among senior royals. Various interpretations of internal palace discussions describe Elizabeth quietly strengthening expectations surrounding who could access, influence, or benefit from certain royal residences once she was gone. According to sources familiar with long-standing palace traditions, the Queen allegedly feared that emotional loyalties and modern political maneuvering could eventually blur the distinction between private relationships and institutional duty. That fear reportedly became especially pronounced after Charles ascended to the throne, while simultaneously navigating personal loyalty to Camilla and constitutional responsibility to preserve the monarchy's integrity during an increasingly fragile era. Insiders whisper that confidential conversations surrounding Balmoral and Sandringham were never simply about property ownership. They involved symbolic authority over places woven directly into the monarchy's emotional identity. Balmoral, where generations of royals sought refuge from public chaos. Sandringham, the spiritual center of royal Christmas traditions and private family continuity. These estates were allegedly viewed by Elizabeth not as rewards to distribute, but as protected sanctuaries tied to the crown's long-term survival. And according to palace administrative streams, concerns reportedly erupted once discussions emerged suggesting that individuals within Camilla's wider circle may have begun making assumptions about future influence connected to those royal spaces. What reportedly intensified the panic was the perception that unofficial expectations were quietly forming, before formal agreements had ever been finalized. Senior palace officials allegedly became alarmed by what insiders described as unauthorized assumptions regarding future estate access, social authority, and long-term positioning around key royal residences. Different interpretations of internal memos suggest that some advisors feared emotional proximity to the king was beginning to create dangerous confusion about institutional limits inside the royal household. And for senior members of the old guard, that possibility reportedly crossed into deeply sensitive territory. Sources close to royal operations claim that Anne reacted particularly strongly after hearing allegations that certain figures around Camilla viewed parts of the late queen's legacy as flexible assets rather than protected royal obligations. To Anne, insiders whisper, the issue was never personal resentment. It was about defending the crown from the gradual erosion of discipline that she believed could weaken the monarchy from within. Prince William reportedly shared similar fears. According to those familiar with his thinking, William viewed the situation as a dangerous threat to sacred continuity at a moment when public trust in the monarchy already felt increasingly fragile. Reports claim he worried that even the appearance of internal competition over the Queen's protected legacy could trigger long-term reputational damage that future generations of royals would struggle to repair. Suddenly, the disagreement unfolding behind palace walls was no longer just about inheritance structures. It became a battle over what the monarchy itself was supposed to represent in the years after Elizabeth's death. And the deeper palace officials looked into the growing tensions, the more unsettling the atmosphere reportedly became. Royal insiders now claim that quiet factions had already begun forming behind closed doors, with some advisors urging caution while others allegedly pushed for firmer intervention, before expectations hardened into permanent entitlement. Charles, meanwhile, reportedly found himself trapped between emotional loyalty and institutional pressure, increasingly isolated as the people closest to him delivered conflicting warnings about duty, legacy, and survival. Some insiders even suggest the king initially hoped the entire matter could be resolved quietly through private reassurances and careful compromise. But by then, palace anxiety had already spread too far. The old guard allegedly feared that if boundaries surrounding the late queen's legacy appeared negotiable even once, the monarchy could face years of internal instability hidden beneath a polished public image. And as concerns inside the palace intensified, insiders claim one private request from Camilla's camp changed everything overnight. What began as quiet administrative discussions reportedly transformed into open royal warfare, the moment a highly sensitive proposal landed before the king. A proposal that some insiders now describe as the single most dangerous overreach of Camilla's royal life. According to whispered accounts now circulating through palace corridors, the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace changed almost instantly after advisors connected to Queen Camilla allegedly explored expanded privileges tied to the future usage and influence surrounding portions of the late Queen's protected estates. What shocked senior members of the royal household was not merely the request itself, but the belief that it arrived during one of the most fragile periods of King Charles III's reign, when ongoing health struggles had already left the monarch physically exhausted and emotionally vulnerable behind closed doors. Reports suggest Charles initially believed the matter involved minor administrative clarification, but insiders now claim the proposal quickly escalated into a devastating constitutional and emotional confrontation, once palace legal advisors began reviewing the wider implications attached to estate access, symbolic authority, and inheritance boundaries connected to the crown. Different interpretations of the discussions describe a growing sense of panic among senior staff members as the realization spread that this was no longer a private family disagreement quietly contained within palace walls. It had become a direct collision between personal loyalty and institutional survival. Sources close to royal operations claim the proposal allegedly carried implications far beyond temporary residence arrangements or ceremonial privileges. According to insiders familiar with the monarchy's internal structure, some palace figures feared the discussions represented an attempt to gradually normalize broader influence around royal legacy holdings that had traditionally remained tightly protected under the late Queen Elizabeth II's personal oversight. That fear reportedly triggered immediate legal scrutiny. Palace administrative streams suggest teams of constitutional advisors and estate lawyers were quietly assembled to review inheritance frameworks, legacy protections, and long-standing limitations surrounding how certain properties could be managed after Elizabeth's death. The deeper they examined the issue, insiders whisper, the more alarmed senior officials became. Some allegedly feared that even symbolic concessions could permanently weaken the invisible institutional barriers protecting the monarchy from internal factional influence. Others reportedly worried that public exposure of the dispute would devastate Charles's already delicate reign by reinforcing perceptions of instability and division within the House of Windsor. As tensions escalated, palace corridors allegedly filled with whispered warnings that the monarchy was drifting toward one of the most dangerous internal crises since the years following Princess Diana's death. And at the center of it all stood Charles himself, torn between defending his wife and preserving the sacred continuity of the crown his mother had spent 70 years protecting. But if Charles appeared emotionally conflicted, insiders claim Princess Anne reacted very differently. Various interpretations of private palace conversations describe Anne becoming absolutely furious after hearing details surrounding the alleged proposal. Sources close to the old guard claim she viewed the situation not simply as poor judgment, but as what one insider reportedly described as institutional disrespect toward the boundaries Queen Elizabeth deliberately established before her passing. Anne, whose entire royal identity has long been tied to discipline, sacrifice, and duty above personal ambition, allegedly believed the monarchy was approaching a dangerous tipping point where emotional influence risked overtaking constitutional restraint. Reports suggest she warned advisors that once the crown allowed symbolic lines to blur around protected royal assets, restoring authority later would become almost impossible. Prince William reportedly shared similar concerns, though insiders describe his response as colder and more strategic. According to those familiar with his thinking, William feared the long-term public consequences if news of internal struggles over royal inheritance ever reached full public exposure. Sources whisper that he privately warned senior aides the monarchy could suffer permanent reputational damage if the public began viewing protected royal estates as prizes contested through emotional leverage, rather than sacred institutions preserved through duty. The contrast between William's calculated restraint and Anne's fury reportedly exposed the depth of anxiety consuming the palace behind closed doors. As the crisis deepened, the royal household allegedly began fracturing into quiet factions. Some courtiers reportedly believed Charles should compromise in order to avoid humiliating Camilla publicly during such a vulnerable chapter of his reign. Others insisted any concession would only encourage further erosion of institutional boundaries carefully preserved for generations. Different interpretations of palace dynamics now suggest that senior advisors, private secretaries, and even longtime household staff quietly began aligning themselves with competing camps as tensions intensified. The emotional atmosphere reportedly became unbearable. Meetings stretched late into the night. Conversations stopped abruptly when unfamiliar figures entered corridors. Insiders claim even trusted aides began questioning who could still be relied upon as loyalty, fear, and survival instincts collided beneath the surface of royal protocol. And while Camilla's allies reportedly believed Charles would compromise, they underestimated the one royal figure who had spent her entire life preparing for moments exactly like this. The moment Princess Anne allegedly learned the full details of the dispute, insiders claim the atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace shifted instantly. Meetings were rescheduled. Legal reviews accelerated. Access permissions reportedly changed overnight. And within royal circles, one phrase suddenly began circulating in fearful whispers: the Iron Protocol has begun. According to palace insiders, Anne did not react emotionally in public. She did something far more unsettling. She became methodical, cold, ruthlessly focused. Reports suggest that within hours of reviewing confidential details tied to the growing estate controversy, Anne quietly positioned herself at the center of internal oversight discussions involving the late Queen Elizabeth II's protected holdings. Different interpretations of palace operations describe administrative schedules being rewritten with almost military precision as Anne allegedly began coordinating directly with senior constitutional advisors, estate custodians, and trusted royal accountants who had served the crown for decades. What frightened many within the palace, insiders whisper, was not simply the speed of the response, but the unmistakable feeling that Anne had anticipated a moment like this for years. For the old guard surrounding the monarchy, she represented something increasingly rare inside modern royal life: absolute institutional discipline untouched by emotional compromise. And once she stepped forward, the balance of power behind palace walls reportedly changed overnight. Emergency consultations were allegedly held with Prince William and several of the monarchy's most trusted constitutional figures as anxiety surrounding the dispute deepened. Sources close to palace operations claim Anne viewed the matter not as a temporary family disagreement, but as a direct test of whether the monarchy still possessed the internal strength to defend its sacred boundaries during a period of extraordinary vulnerability. According to insiders familiar with those late-night discussions, William reportedly aligned himself closely with Anne's position after reviewing confidential assessments warning of long-term reputational damage if estate protections appeared negotiable under emotional pressure. Together, whispers suggest, Anne and William began forming what some courtiers privately described as a containment strategy, designed to stabilize the institution before the crisis spiraled beyond control. Royal accountants and legal custodians allegedly reopened sensitive inheritance frameworks tied to Balmoral, Sandringham, and other protected legacy holdings associated with the Crown's continuity. Every clause, every agreement, every historical safeguard reportedly came under renewed examination as fears spread that the monarchy was drifting toward a constitutional and symbolic breaking point. Palace insiders claim the reviews became so extensive that some staff members quietly compared the atmosphere to a wartime audit conducted under conditions of absolute secrecy. But the most dramatic shift reportedly involved the sudden collapse of influence surrounding Camilla's allies within key palace operations. According to various interpretations of internal administrative movements, figures once considered closely connected to sensitive royal discussions allegedly found themselves gradually excluded from meetings, legacy consultations, and strategic planning sessions tied to estate matters. Access reportedly narrowed. Communication channels allegedly tightened. Long-standing assumptions about proximity to royal authority suddenly began dissolving under the weight of Anne's intervention. Palace staff insiders claim the change became impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped when certain names entered corridors. Invitations quietly disappeared. Administrative requests faced unusual delays. What had once looked like stable influence around Queen Camilla reportedly began unraveling with breathtaking speed as the old guard reasserted control over institutional operations. Different interpretations of the situation describe growing panic among some of Camilla's supporters, many of whom allegedly believed Charles would ultimately intervene to restore balance before the damage became permanent. But by then, the emotional and political pressure surrounding the king had already intensified beyond anything he had anticipated. Sources close to the royal household claim King Charles III increasingly found himself trapped between two devastating forces, pulling him in opposite directions. On one side stood personal loyalty, emotional history, and the woman who had remained beside him through years of scandal, criticism, and public scrutiny. On the other stood the institution he had inherited from his mother, a crown built upon centuries of sacrifice, restraint, and brutal prioritization of duty over personal desire. Reports suggest Anne's intervention only sharpened the impossible choice facing the king, because every legal review, every constitutional consultation, and every tightening restriction quietly reinforced the same painful message. The monarchy could survive emotional heartbreak, but it could not survive weakened boundaries around its sacred legacy. Palace insiders whisper that Charles became visibly more isolated as the crisis deepened, holding fewer informal meetings and relying increasingly on tightly controlled consultations with only his most trusted advisors. Staff members reportedly noticed an unmistakable cooling in Camilla's access to highly sensitive royal matters, a shift many interpreted as evidence that Anne's strategy was already taking hold behind closed doors. Yet even as the machinery of the palace moved with cold precision to contain the crisis, the emotional damage inside the royal family continued growing more severe by the day. But even Anne's intervention could not stop the emotional collapse unfolding behind closed doors, as Charles faced the most painful decision of his reign. According to multiple palace whispers, the final confrontation did not end with shouting. It ended in silence, the kind of silence that reportedly settled over Buckingham Palace after King Charles III delivered a decision that left Queen Camilla stunned, isolated, and, for the first time since the coronation, politically powerless inside the royal household. Sources close to palace operations claim the conversation itself was painfully brief, stripped of the emotional warmth that had once defined Charles and Camilla's decades-long relationship. There were reportedly no dramatic ultimatums, no public explosion, only the cold weight of duty pressing down on a king who had spent his entire life preparing to defend the crown, only to find himself forced to defend it against a crisis unfolding within his own inner circle. Different interpretations of the meeting describe Charles appearing exhausted beyond recognition as advisors quietly outlined the final recommendations emerging from weeks of legal reviews, constitutional consultations, and mounting pressure from senior members of the royal household. By then, insiders whisper, the decision had already become unavoidable. Reports suggest Charles ultimately ordered a strict separation between Camilla and all highly sensitive estate affairs tied to the late Queen Elizabeth II's protected legacy structures, believing there was no other way to contain the growing institutional damage threatening the monarchy behind closed doors. What followed reportedly sent shockwaves through palace corridors. According to royal insiders, Camilla's residential and administrative privileges were quietly reduced through a series of discreet internal changes designed to avoid public humiliation, while still enforcing clear boundaries around royal authority. Various interpretations of palace operations describe adjustments to access permissions, planning consultations, and sensitive briefings connected to legacy holdings and constitutional matters. To the public, almost nothing appeared different at first glance. But inside the palace, insiders claim the shift was immediate and unmistakable. Figures once considered close to Camilla allegedly found themselves excluded from conversations involving estate oversight and future institutional planning. Royal administrative streams suggest the move was privately described within certain palace circles as a temporary removal from palace authority structures. Language that carried enormous symbolic weight among senior courtiers, who understood exactly what it implied. For decades, proximity to the monarch had translated into influence. But now, according to those familiar with the situation, Charles was being forced to draw a brutal line between personal affection and institutional preservation. And with every passing day, that line reportedly became more painful to maintain. Sources close to the royal family claim Charles struggled emotionally with the consequences of the decision more than anyone inside the palace fully understood. Different interpretations of his private state describe a man caught between grief, guilt, exhaustion, and the crushing awareness that his reign had become defined by crisis after crisis during a period when his physical health was already under relentless scrutiny. Insiders whisper that Charles reportedly spent long periods isolated inside his private quarters after the confrontation, speaking only with a small circle of trusted advisors while avoiding broader household gatherings whenever possible. Yet despite the emotional devastation, palace officials claim the king gradually became convinced that the monarchy's survival had to come before every personal relationship, including the one he had fought decades to legitimize in the eyes of the public and the institution itself. Prince William and Princess Anne allegedly supported the decision privately, though insiders suggest neither took satisfaction in the outcome. Anne reportedly viewed the separation as necessary to restore institutional discipline, while William allegedly believed the monarchy could not survive prolonged ambiguity surrounding protected royal assets during such a fragile chapter in public trust. Together, they are said to have reinforced the same devastating message to Charles: emotional compromise could no longer outweigh constitutional stability. Outside palace walls, subtle signs of the internal fracture slowly began attracting attention. Media insiders reportedly noticed Camilla's growing absence from key royal planning appearances and sensitive institutional discussions that she had previously attended without question. Royal correspondents began whispering about unexplained scheduling changes, unusual distance between senior royals during private gatherings, and the increasingly controlled nature of palace communications surrounding estate-related matters. To the public, these details appeared minor, but within the ecosystem of royal observation, they carried enormous significance. Different interpretations of the changes fueled speculation that something far deeper than routine palace adjustments was unfolding behind the scenes. And perhaps most haunting of all was the realization that the monarchy now appeared trapped in the very kind of internal conflict Queen Elizabeth had spent decades trying to prevent. because for all the emotional devastation surrounding Charles's decision, insiders claim the deeper fear inside the palace was not simply about Camilla's fall from influence. It was about the terrifying possibility that the late queen had foreseen this exact crisis long before anyone else recognized the danger. Yet the most haunting part of the story wasn't the separation itself. It was the realization that Queen Elizabeth may have anticipated this entire crisis years before it ever unfolded. Long after her passing, Queen Elizabeth II still appears to cast a silent shadow over every royal decision. And according to those familiar with the palace's deepest traditions, the safeguards she allegedly left behind became the invisible force that ultimately stopped the monarchy from spiraling into chaos. In the weeks following the confrontation that shook the foundations of the royal household, insiders claim a chilling realization slowly began spreading through Buckingham Palace. The late queen may have anticipated this crisis years before it ever unfolded. Reports suggest Elizabeth quietly spent the final chapter of her reign reinforcing confidential guidance, succession expectations, and institutional boundaries designed specifically to protect the monarchy from emotional instability during moments of internal vulnerability. To the public, she had always appeared calm, disciplined, and unwavering. But behind closed doors, sources familiar with palace traditions claim she understood better than anyone how personal loyalties, unchecked influence, and family tensions could slowly erode the crown from within if left unmanaged. That understanding, insiders whisper, shaped nearly every safeguard she allegedly placed around royal estates, succession structures, and constitutional responsibilities long before her death. And now, as Charles struggled beneath the emotional weight of his reign, those safeguards were reportedly becoming the only thing preventing the monarchy from collapsing into public humiliation. According to palace administrative streams, Elizabeth had long insisted that crown assets must never become vulnerable to private ambitions or emotional negotiations, no matter how painful the circumstances surrounding them. Different interpretations of her private philosophy describe a monarch deeply haunted by the lessons of history, abdications, scandals, broken marriages, public betrayals, and periods when emotional decision-making nearly destabilized the institution itself. Sources close to former royal staff claim she believed the monarchy survived only when duty remained stronger than personal attachment. That principle reportedly shaped her entire reign. From inheritance protections surrounding Balmoral Castle to the long-standing management traditions tied to Sandringham House, Elizabeth allegedly viewed royal holdings, not as private rewards, but as sacred trusts temporarily carried by individuals on behalf of the crown itself. Insiders whisper that she repeatedly warned senior members of the family against allowing emotional loyalties to cloud institutional judgment, especially during periods of personal vulnerability. Those warnings reportedly returned with devastating force during the crisis surrounding Camilla, as palace officials began revisiting confidential guidance and internal expectations Elizabeth had quietly reinforced for decades. Suddenly, decisions that once seemed excessively cautious or emotionally distant started appearing almost prophetic. Sources familiar with internal palace dynamics claim Princess Anne became one of the strongest voices invoking those long-standing royal principles as tensions reached their breaking point. Different interpretations of private consultations describe Anne repeatedly emphasizing that the monarchy's survival depended on preserving the exact institutional discipline her mother had spent 70 years defending. According to insiders, Anne allegedly reminded advisors that Elizabeth had never confused affection with authority, even during the most emotionally devastating moments of her reign. That philosophy reportedly shaped the cold precision of Anne's response throughout the crisis. To her, protecting the crown was not cruelty, it was obligation. King Charles III, meanwhile, reportedly struggled with the emotional consequences of confronting the same painful truths his mother had spent her life trying to teach him. Palace insiders claim Charles was repeatedly reminded during private consultations that Elizabeth always feared the monarchy becoming vulnerable to blurred boundaries between family loyalty and constitutional responsibility. Some even whisper that confidential conversations from years earlier suddenly took on terrifying new meaning once the estate dispute escalated beyond control. The deeper Charles reflected on his mother's warnings, the more isolated he reportedly became, trapped between personal heartbreak and the realization that she may have understood this danger long before he did. as the palace slowly stabilized under tighter institutional control. A growing belief reportedly emerged among courtiers that the monarchy had narrowly escaped a catastrophic public scandal, capable of permanently damaging Charles's reign. Media insiders had already begun sensing fractures inside the royal household, and palace officials allegedly feared that even limited exposure of the inheritance conflict could have triggered a devastating wave of public distrust at a time when confidence in the monarchy already felt increasingly fragile. According to sources close to the old guard, the late Queen's invisible influence became the quiet force holding everything together during those chaotic weeks. Her structures, her principles, her warnings, her relentless insistence that the crown must always come before personal comfort. Yet even as palace operations returned to outward stability, insiders whisper that something far more painful had already broken behind closed doors. Because while institutional order may have been restored, the emotional cost of the crisis continued haunting the royal family long after the legal reviews and emergency consultations ended. But even after the palace restored order, the damage inside the royal family was far from over, and the future relationship between Charles and Camilla would never look the same again. Behind the polished smiles and carefully staged appearances, insiders now whisper that the royal marriage at the center of the monarchy has entered its coldest chapter yet. And while the palace continues projecting stability to the public, those closest to the king reportedly know the emotional fracture runs far deeper than anyone expected. In the aftermath of the estate crisis that shook the foundations of the royal household, sources close to Buckingham Palace claim an invisible distance has settled between King Charles III and Queen Camilla, not dramatic enough to trigger public scandal, but cold enough to transform the atmosphere inside the monarchy itself. Reports suggest the king and queen now operate through increasingly separate advisory circles, with palace operations allegedly becoming more compartmentalized than at any point since the coronation. Different interpretations of recent royal scheduling patterns describe a household quietly reorganizing itself around emotional caution, institutional control, and carefully managed distance. To the public, appearances continue. Engagements proceed. Statements are released with polished precision. But behind the scenes, insiders whisper that conversations once handled informally between Charles and Camilla now reportedly move through layers of advisors, constitutional staff, and tightly controlled consultations, shaped largely by the growing influence of the old guard. And for many inside the palace, that shift represents far more than temporary tension. It signals the emotional unraveling of a partnership that once appeared politically untouchable. According to senior courtiers familiar with internal operations, anxiety has steadily grown over the possibility that unresolved tensions inside the royal marriage could slowly destabilize palace decision-making during one of the most delicate periods of Charles's reign. Sources close to royal administration claim some staff members now operate under constant uncertainty, unsure which advisory network truly carries the king's confidence at any given moment. Different interpretations of the current atmosphere describe an institution functioning outwardly with discipline while privately struggling beneath the pressure of fractured loyalties and emotional exhaustion. What makes the situation especially dangerous, insiders suggest, is that the monarchy cannot afford prolonged instability, while public scrutiny surrounding Charles's health continues intensifying. Every cancelled appearance, every unusual scheduling adjustment, every subtle shift in body language between senior royals reportedly fuels another wave of speculation about what is truly happening behind palace walls. And because the royal household refuses to publicly address the growing rumors, the silence itself has started becoming part of the story. Some insiders now fear that the palace's strategy of maintaining rigid public calm may actually be deepening suspicion that internal fractures are far worse than anyone initially believed. Amid the uncertainty, Prince William has reportedly begun stepping more quietly, yet more decisively into future leadership responsibilities. According to palace insiders, William's role inside institutional planning discussions has expanded significantly since the estate crisis erupted, particularly regarding long-term continuity strategy and operational oversight connected to the monarchy's public image. Sources familiar with internal dynamics claim William has increasingly positioned himself as a stabilizing force capable of preserving discipline, while Charles remains emotionally and physically strained. Yet even as William's influence grows, insiders whisper that no figure inside the royal household currently commands more strategic authority than Princess Anne. Reports suggest Anne's role in restoring order during the crisis dramatically strengthened her standing among senior advisors, constitutional staff, and longtime custodians of royal tradition. Different interpretations of palace operations now describe Anne as the quiet center of institutional gravity inside the monarchy, the figure many within the old guard trust most when emotional loyalties threaten to blur constitutional boundaries. Her influence reportedly extends far beyond ceremonial appearances, shaping internal strategy discussions, estate oversight consultations, and crisis management planning at the highest levels of the household. And as Anne's authority quietly expands, Camilla's allies allegedly continue losing ground within the structures of royal power. Sources close to palace operations claim figures once considered closely connected to Camilla have become increasingly isolated from major institutional decisions involving legacy matters, constitutional planning, and long-term royal strategy. Invitations reportedly narrowed. Access allegedly tightened. Informal influence that once flowed naturally through proximity to the Queen now appears constrained by a colder and far more cautious administrative structure. Different interpretations of the situation suggest some within Camilla's circle initially believed the emotional storm surrounding the estate dispute would eventually fade with time. But insiders now whisper that the damage may have reached deeper than anyone anticipated, because trust, once broken inside the monarchy, is rarely restored completely. Meanwhile, public silence from the palace continues intensifying speculation surrounding the true condition of the royal household. Royal commentators, media insiders, and former staff members increasingly question whether the monarchy is quietly entering another era of internal fracture, hidden beneath carefully managed appearances and ceremonial tradition. Yet despite the fear, uncertainty, and emotional fallout still lingering inside Buckingham Palace, one truth now appears impossible for even the palace itself to fully suppress. And as Britain watches the monarchy attempt to steady itself once again, one final truth continues echoing through palace walls louder than ever before. In the end, insiders say this was never truly a battle between husband and wife. It was a battle between personal loyalty and the unforgiving machinery of the crown itself. And throughout royal history, the monarchy has always demanded the same brutal sacrifice from those who stand too close to its power. Duty must come before everything else. What began as whispered concerns surrounding estate access and private influence eventually exposed something far deeper inside the House of Windsor, the terrifying reality that even love can become secondary when the survival of the monarchy is perceived to be at risk. According to palace insiders, the dispute surrounding the late Queen Elizabeth II's protected legacy holdings forced King Charles III into the single most painful position of his reign. For years, Charles had reportedly tried balancing two worlds that were never fully compatible: the emotional loyalty he carried toward Queen Camilla and the crushing institutional responsibility passed down through generations of monarchs before him. But as tensions deepened behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, insiders whisper that Charles slowly realized compromise was no longer possible. The monarchy demanded clarity, boundaries, sacrifice. And in the end, the crown always collects its price from those who attempt to stand between personal desire and institutional survival. Reports suggest the estate crisis ultimately became a defining lesson within palace circles about the difference between private inheritance and royal stewardship. To outsiders, properties like Balmoral Castle and Sandringham House may appear like symbols of privilege, wealth, and royal comfort. But according to those familiar with the monarchy's deepest traditions, these estates represent something far more sacred: physical anchors holding together centuries of continuity, sacrifice, and national identity. Sources close to the old guard claim the late Queen spent decades reinforcing the principle that crown legacy could never become vulnerable to emotional negotiations or private assumptions, no matter how complicated family relationships became behind closed doors. That philosophy reportedly guided every major decision during the crisis, especially once fears emerged that institutional boundaries were beginning to blur. Insiders now whisper that the monarchy narrowly avoided a devastating internal fracture capable of permanently weakening public trust during one of the most fragile periods of Charles's reign. And as the palace fought quietly to contain the damage, two figures reportedly emerged as the strongest guardians of royal continuity: Princess Anne and Prince William. According to palace insiders, Anne's role throughout the crisis fundamentally reshaped the internal balance of power within the monarchy. Her cold discipline, unwavering loyalty to institutional tradition, and refusal to compromise reportedly became the stabilizing force preventing emotional chaos from consuming palace operations entirely. William, meanwhile, allegedly stepped deeper into the future role many insiders believe he has been preparing for quietly over the past several years. Together, they represented continuity over emotion, structure over instability, duty over personal attachment. Different interpretations of palace dynamics now suggest their influence only grew stronger as the crisis unfolded, particularly once senior courtiers began recognizing how close the monarchy may have come to public humiliation. And within those same palace circles, Camilla's alleged miscalculation has reportedly transformed into something almost cautionary in tone, a quiet warning about the dangers of underestimating how fiercely the crown protects its sacred boundaries once they are perceived to be under threat. Sources familiar with the old guard claim the lesson now echoing through royal operations is painfully simple. Proximity to power does not guarantee control over it. Not inside the House of Windsor. Not when centuries of tradition stand ready to push back against even the slightest perception of institutional vulnerability. Yet perhaps the most tragic figure in the entire ordeal remains Charles himself. Insiders describe a king emotionally broken by the consequences of a decision he reportedly never wanted to make, but ultimately believed he could not avoid. Throughout his life, Charles had fought for acceptance, legitimacy, and emotional fulfillment within a system built upon restraint and sacrifice. And now, according to palace whispers, he finds himself confronting the same brutal truth every monarch before him eventually learns. The crown does not bend for personal happiness. It survives through obedience to duty, even when that duty destroys the people closest to it. Publicly, the monarchy continues moving forward with polished calm, carefully choreographed appearances, and unwavering ceremonial tradition. But behind the silence, insiders claim the emotional scars left by the estate crisis may never fully disappear. Relationships changed, trust fractured, invisible lines redrawn forever. And as Britain continues watching the House of Windsor navigate another chapter of uncertainty, one final truth now hangs over the monarchy with haunting permanence. Because inside the House of Windsor, crowns may glitter in public, but behind palace walls, legacy is guarded not by love, but by sacrifice, silence, and the cold permanence of duty. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.